Ladies and gentlemen, what we are dealing with today has reached a level of hypocrisy and a level of disrespect toward Shedeur Sanders that is genuinely difficult to process with the kind of measured analytical calm that most situations in this ongoing story have warranted. Because what happened here involves a specific kind of betrayal that cuts deeper than organizational dysfunction or media narrative management or ownership level interference with a quarterback competition. What happened here involves a person who went to Colorado, who stood in front of young men including the son of his former teammate and his friend, who expressed love and connection and the kind of personal bond that transcends professional relationships, and who then turned around and publicly disrespected that same young man in ways that have absolutely nothing to do with honest football evaluation and everything to do with the same pattern of anti-Sanders narrative construction that has been running through this entire situation from the beginning. A former NFL player, someone who was drafted in the same class as Coach Prime, who visited Colorado during Coach Prime's tenure there, who spoke to the football team and expressed genuine love for Deion Sanders and the program he was building, went on the record suggesting that Deshaun Watson should be playing over Shedeur Sanders. Let that sit with you completely before we go anywhere else, because the personal dimension of this situation is as important as the football dimension and deserves to be named directly rather than glossed over in favor of statistical analysis. This man knows Coach Prime. Not peripherally. Not as a passing acquaintance from across a crowded room at a league function. He went to Colorado. He stood in front of Deion Sanders players. He expressed love for the man, for the program, for what was being built there. He was welcomed into that environment with the kind of trust that Coach Prime extends to people he considers genuine, people whose presence adds something positive to the lives of the young men he has dedicated himself to developing. And now, with Coach Prime's son navigating one of the most publicly turbulent and organizationally complicated situations any young NFL quarterback has faced in recent memory, the same man is out here co-signing the narrative that Deshaun Watson deserves to start over him. There is a word for that. And that word is not analysis. That word is not honest football commentary. That word is not the kind of brave and independent sports journalism that holds itself to a standard of evidence-based evaluation regardless of whose feelings might be affected by the conclusion. The word is betrayal. Not the dramatic, movie villain kind of betrayal that gets announced with a speech. The quiet, convenient kind that happens when maintaining a relationship with organizational power or protecting access to certain media circles or simply avoiding the professional discomfort of defending someone who the prevailing narrative has decided to use as a punching bag becomes more important than the human obligation to be honest about what you actually know and what you actually believe about a young man whose father you called your friend. Shedeur Sanders is working while this is happening. That is the contrast that needs to be held in focus throughout this entire conversation. While a man who expressed love for his father is publicly suggesting that a quarterback who refused to speak to the media during mandatory mini-camp activities and who has demonstrated every sign of organizational and competitive disengagement should be starting over him, Shedeur Sanders is in the facility. On the field. Getting reps, still wearing the helmet camera that reflects the coaching staff's ongoing evaluative investment in his development. Putting in the work that a franchise quarterback does every single day regardless of what the media landscape is saying about him and regardless of what former NFL players who visited his father's program are saying about his starting prospects. That contrast is not incidental. It is the most important thing to understand about who Shedeur Sanders is as a competitor and as a professional. The noise does not stop him. The betrayals do not destabilize him. The organizational dysfunction and the media narrative construction and the former teammate disrespect do not interrupt his preparation. He keeps working. He keeps showing up. He keeps giving the coaching staff everything they need to complete the evaluation they have committed to delivering before the end of camp. Now let us talk about something that provides important and genuinely significant context for understanding the magnitude of what Shedeur Sanders represents beyond the immediate drama of this quarterback competition, because the numbers that came out regarding NFL draft viewership tell a story that the people driving the anti-Sanders narrative have every financial incentive to avoid acknowledging honestly. The 2026 NFL draft attracted 2 million more viewers on day one than the 2025 draft did. Day 1 viewership was 13 million in 2026 compared to what the 2025 draft generated. Day 2 drew 7.5 million viewers. Day 3 drew 4.3 million. And the reason for that viewership spike, The reason that additional 2 million people tuned in to watch the first day of the draft connects directly to one specific element of interest that elevated the entire event above what a normal draft cycle generates in terms of audience engagement. People were watching to see where Shedeur Sanders would be selected. You can say what you want about that conclusion. You can reach for alternative explanations if the one that is most obvious makes you uncomfortable. But the timing of the viewership surge, the fact that it concentrated on day one when quarterbacks and other high-profile prospects are selected, and the fact that Sanders was among the most discussed and most anticipated prospects in the entire draft class, makes the connection between his presence in the draft and the elevated viewership numbers not just plausible but essentially undeniable to anyone willing to look at it honestly. That viewership number represents something important about what Shedeur Sanders means to this sport beyond what he means to the Cleveland Browns specifically. He is a draw. He is someone whose story, whose competitive situation, whose family background, whose personal conduct throughout an incredibly difficult public ordeal, has connected with millions of people who are invested in watching what happens to him at a level that exceeds the normal interest generated by a quarterback competition. Those millions of people tuned in to see where he would land. They are watching what Cleveland does with him. They are paying attention to how this story unfolds. And the Cleveland Browns organization, whatever its internal dynamics and whatever the specific motivations of the various people within it who have been driving the anti-Sanders narrative, should understand clearly that how they handle Shedeur Sanders is being watched by an audience whose attention was elevated specifically because of him. Every decision they make about his competitive standing, every organizational choice about who starts and who sits and how the quarterback competition is resolved, will be processed by that audience through the lens of everything that has already happened throughout this offseason. Now let us address the shift that is coming in Cleveland media coverage, because it needs to be named before it happens so that the people watching this situation have the analytical framework to recognize it for what it is when it arrives rather than being taken in by it. The Cleveland reporters and content creators who have been nominally supportive of Shedeur Sanders throughout this process are going to begin shifting their coverage toward Watson. It is already starting at the margins. Tony Grossi has been moving in that direction. Others will follow. And the mechanism through which this shift will be presented to the audience is not going to be honest acknowledgement that the organizational power structure has made a decision and the coverage is aligning itself with that decision. It is going to be framed as the reporter finally calling it like they see it, finally being honest about what the practice field evidence is showing, finally prioritizing truth over fan favorites. That framing is going to be dishonest. Not because honest assessment of a quarterback competition is wrong or inappropriate, but because the shift in coverage will not be driven by honest assessment. It will be driven by the same access relationships and organizational dynamics that have driven every other element of this situation. When a media personality who has built their audience partly on the energy and the interest generated by Shedeur Sanders begins pivoting toward Watson, the question that audience needs to ask is not whether the pivot reflects genuine football conviction. The question is what changed in the relationship between that media personality and the organizational power structure that would make such a pivot professionally advantageous for them at this specific moment. The receipts are being kept. Every shift will be documented. Every pivot away from the evidence toward the organizational narrative will be noted. And the audience that has been built around honest analysis of this situation deserves to have those receipts shown to them clearly when the time comes. Here is the broader picture that all of this points toward when you zoom out and look at the full scope of what Shedeur Sanders has been navigating since he arrived in Cleveland. He came into an organization with genuine talent and genuine potential that was being managed by competing power centers with competing agendas that did not always align with the football vision of the coaching staff responsible for winning games. He performed at the level his talent warranted given the circumstances around him, which included inadequate offensive line protection and a receiving core with significant reliability issues, as the statistical analysis we have already conducted makes clear. He handled public controversy with a combination of directness and dignity that reflected the values instilled in him by a father who built his entire coaching philosophy around developing complete human beings rather than just producing athletic performance. He graduated from college and announced his intention to continue his education. He posted about elevation and lifting others while organizational forces were actively working against his competitive standing. He kept working while people who expressed love for his father disrespected him publicly on media platforms. And through all of it, the coaching staff maintained its evaluative investment in him. The helmet camera kept running. The commitment to resolving the competition before the end of camp remained on record. The draft infrastructure built around his success remained in place. Spencer Fano remained the left tackle selected at number 9 to protect his blind side. The people actually responsible for putting together a football team that wins games have not abandoned him. The people with financial interests in a different outcome and media personalities aligned with those financial interests have been generating the noise. But noise and signal are different things. And the signal from the people who actually make the football decisions has been remarkably consistent throughout this entire process. The former NFL player who visited Colorado and expressed love for Coach Prime before publicly suggesting Watson should start over his son has revealed something important about the nature of the people surrounding this situation. Love expressed in comfortable settings is easy. Standing by that love when it becomes professionally inconvenient is what separates genuine relationships from transactional ones. And the pattern of people expressing connection to the Sanders family and then pivoting when the organizational wins suggested a different position would be more professionally advantageous has been one of the most consistently disappointing recurring themes in this entire story. Coach Prime built his sons to withstand exactly this. Not because he predicted these specific circumstances, but because he understood that the world would produce circumstances like these and that young men who are intellectually equipped, emotionally grounded, spiritually anchored, and academically credentialed are young men who can navigate whatever those circumstances produce without being broken by them. Shedeur Sanders is still working. The camera is still running. The preseason is coming. And when those preseason games are played, the footage that does not lie will have its say about everything that the organizational dynamics and the media narratives and the former teammate betrayals and the shifted coverage have been obscuring. Be prepared for the media shift. Keep the receipts. Watch the preseason footage. And trust the signal over the noise. Because the signal has been saying the same thing since the first day of minicamp. And it is still saying it now.